to an hour. Well, let me share my screen with you and show you what I'm talking about. Can you all see this? Cannot, can you see this? It's my PowerPoint presentation about chewing. Who has a PowerPoint presentation about chewing except the biggest nerd ever? Okay. Chewing. Efficiency begins in your body. Now, we're just going to talk about, I want to ask you, most people assume when you're going to hear a lecture about chewing that someone's going to wax on for an hour about how, hi Sheldon, look at you with your cute beard, your little pandemic beard. Everyone assumes that what I'm going to say is like, pay attention, don't wolf your food. Like, you know, I want you to sit and be mindful like a hippie while you chew. Raise your hand if you think that's what a chewing class is all about, is just reminding you to slow down. Of course. Thank you. Well, you're wrong. You've come to the wrong class. That's not what's going to happen. Chewing well does not require mindfulness. We don't need to, first of all, we're eating healthy food. That means you're shopping for healthy food. You're probably paying a little more money for it. You're schlepping it home. Notice I use the word schlep. I'm teaching Israel right now. You are cooking for hours and hours and hours. And now I expect you to sit down and spend another hour eating your food. That sounds like hell. Chewing does not require mindfulness. Chewing leads to mindfulness. And chewing leads to mindfulness because when we eat a healthy diet, we're actually ingesting primarily complex carbohydrate. And complex carbohydrate requires the beating of the carbohydrate in the mouth by the molars and the application of digestive enzymes in order to convert that complex carbohydrate into glucose, which then goes to your brain. Chewing is about beating the crap out of complex carbohydrates. If you're going to bother to have a healthy diet, which is a plant-based diet, plants are almost entirely complex carbohydrate, and you must chew them. Let's talk about what we call the fullness fallacy, or what I call the fullness fallacy. Have you ever heard someone say, well, it takes 20 minutes for your brain to figure out that you're full? Like, it takes 20 minutes, so slow down, and you're not going to register that you're full for 20 minutes. This is like saying, I stubbed my toe 20 minutes ago, and I'm finally feeling pain. Okay? This is a ridiculous thing. I love it when we don't understand something well enough, so we just make up some story and decide that it's our fact until we figure out the actual story. Fullness is not a function of the stomach being full. Fullness, which when we say it, we really mean the word satisfaction. Satisfaction is a function of glucose getting to the brain. So you can be hungry, but drink an alcoholic drink and feel fine for the next hour. You can be in a hospital on a drip, an IV of some sort of solution or drug and feel fine and not register any hunger and feel fully satisfied because glucose is getting to your brain. That's what causes us to signal a feeling of satisfaction, not our stomach being full. One of the reasons it takes 20 minutes to register that you're full is if you don't chew, it will take roughly 20 minutes for complex carbohydrates to make it to your small intestine, get converted to glucose there, and then reach your brain. So there is some truth in the experiential side of this, but it's based on kind of baloney facts. Complex carbohydrates become glucose through the action of the molars, breaking them down, and the application of a digestive enzyme that is produced primarily in your mouth called amylase, otherwise known as ptyalin. Now, amylase is specifically designed to work on complex carbohydrates. You secrete tons of it in your mouth and less of it in your small intestine. It is not secreted in your stomach. So if you don't use your mouth to break down the complex carbohydrate, they don't break down until they hit your small intestine, at which point you're feeling gassy and bloated because you haven't done your work in the anteroom. And as it says here, they break down into sugars. Your brain needs sugar. We don't like to use the word sugar anymore. We have shamed carbohydrates for the last 25 years. We've even shamed glucose for the last 25 years. But the truth of it is, the brain requires more glucose than any other organ in the body. And when your brain is depleted of glucose, you will crave sweets. That's why a lot of people crave sweets most of the day. They're dealing with what we call hypoglycemia, which means low glucose levels. Diabetes is hyperglycemia, too much glucose and not enough insulin to usher it into the cells. But most of us are dealing with hypoglycemia because our bodies are running at a glucose deficit. When you're running at the deficit, the brain is constantly saying, Snickers bar, Snickers bar, Snickers bar. So I find it incredibly unfortunate when people spend so much time and energy and money making for themselves this healthy diet. It's primarily complex carbohydrate with some protein, but mostly complex carbohydrate. Even beans, even legumes are 75% complex carbohydrate. And if you get farty with beans, chew them, and I promise you, you won't. But when people spend so much energy on getting this diet for themselves, and then they basically don't use it, and it just goes down the chute without having been processed, because the only way to properly process it is to chew it. Some people will take their $50 worth of vegetables and shove it in a $5 smoothie and think that they are now getting all the bits and pieces of the diet. But in fact, if they don't apply amylase in their mouth to the smoothie, it too will not be absorbed and converted to glucose as efficiently as your mouth can. This is your brain on glucose. It's happy. And you experience what I call stupid happiness. When you convert complex carbohydrates into glucose in your mouth by activating them with amylase, and the glucose goes almost directly to your brain, within 4 or 5 bites, I promise you, your brain will have a hit of glucose that you may never have experienced up until now. It may be an entirely new thing. That's why I get so passionate about the subject, because people don't know. They've never been through the eye of the needle of their mouth. You get what I call stupid happiness, which is happiness based on nothing. We're so used to believing that happiness is contingent on some external factor. Something makes us happy. Well, guess what? By breaking down complex carbohydrates, converting them to glucose, and letting that glucose bathe your brain, you'll feel happy for no particular reason, which is one of the greatest joys in the world, to realize that you are capable of that. And all it takes is chewing the crap out of a green bean. You will also feel creativity that comes from the glucose in your brain. If we're all running around with like depleted glucose levels in our brains, we're grumpy, we're dissatisfied, we're feeling constantly like we're living in a world of lack. But you begin to fill the glucose reserves in your brain, and everything begins the opposite trajectory, which is to create. We get to create from this mind. All right, let's rewind. Am I the first person to talk about chewing? No. Let's go back to one of the first major chewers. Horace Fletcher lived between 1849 and 1919. Horace Fletcher was known as the Great Masticator. He started a fad called Fletcherizing, which was basically chewing. And during his years as the Great Masticator, he said things like, "Nature will castigate those who don't masticate." Cute little rhyme, but completely and utterly true. Horace Fletcher was actually a really interesting dude who made friends with all the bigwigs of his day, Upton Sinclair, Rockefeller, Mark Twain, all visited and were friends with Horace Fletcher. He had a place in Venice, and he was an interesting dude. Fletcherism was a very, very popular food fad, although I hesitate to call it a fad. That's just the word we use for stuff like that. It was the big food fad right before calories were discovered, and we started to count calories, which we're still obsessed with and tyrannized by. So Horace Fletcher, so if your grandmother or great-grandmother insisted that you chew, she may have actually been influenced by Fletcher. He was a big deal at the time. Fletcher called this part of the body, from your mouth to the back of your throat, or to the back of your mouth, the 3 inches of personal responsibility, which I consider just such an interesting concept. We don't think of our digestive tract, we think of it as from our stomach through our colon. But really, your digestion starts here, and Fletcher would argue that if you don't use the 3 inches of personal responsibility, A, your digestion will suffer, and you will suffer because of it, but that this is the only part of our digestive tract over which we have any control. Once it's passed through the mouth, it's going to do what it's going to do, and you actually can't change it. You can make no personal decisions about it after it's gone down your throat. But if you play with your 3 inches of personal responsibility, you actually impact the rest of its journey. And if the amylase is applied here, all the rest of the digestive enzymes, and there are different ones, then are meted out at the right time in the right amounts, and your digestion is actually incredibly seamless and pleasant. He recommended that you chew every bite 32 times. This corresponded to the number of teeth in the mouth. It was a little bit arbitrary, but 32 times is a significant amount of time to chew. I recommend that people chew 50 times. And when you've fallen into 50 times and that becomes a little normal for you, to even extend it to 100 and see what that does for you, because that sends you on a whole other trip. By the way, I don't expect anyone to chew 50 times every mouthful of every meal. That's excessive, and we'll talk about the practicalities of chewing in a bit. He wrote a book called Fletcherism, or How I Became Young at 60, and you could get it on Amazon. You can get a Kindle version of it on Amazon. It's really great. He's a pretty good writer, and he's passionate. He's like the George Osawa of chewing. And if you don't know who George Osawa is, go to a class on macrobiotics. Gannat and Sheldon can explain it. All right, so let's break down the nuts and bolts of what Fletcher was talking about. Oh, here we go. Biggest food fad until the calorie counting began. Welcome to your mouth. You have molars for chewing. We all know that. But isn't that interesting that most of your teeth are for breaking down complex carbohydrates and doing that, beating the crap? I don't like grinding or pulverizing. I like beating the crap. I like that. It's just a more memorable way of saying it. But you also have 2 types of saliva going on in your mouth. And we tend to diminish the role of saliva. We call it spit. If you spit at somebody, that's like the highest form of insult. But really, your saliva is incredibly interesting. So your 2 types of saliva are stimulated. Now, stimulated saliva is the stuff that if I were to say to you now, I want you to imagine sucking on a lemon. And if you really imagine that, you stimulate saliva in your mouth. This is primarily for digestion, and it has a certain pH. And funnily enough, the body is so precise that if I told you to imagine sucking on a lemon, you stimulate the exact pH saliva to neutralize lemon's acid. It's really interesting. You have a chemistry set in here. Of the saliva that and you have unstimulated saliva, which is the viscous coating of saliva that exists within your mouth 24 hours a day. It plays a different role. First, let's look at stimulated saliva. It makes up 70 to 90% of all the saliva generated in a day. And in a day, you generate 2 to 3 pints of saliva. So there's a lot going on in your mouth. In Chinese medicine, or the ancient Chinese called stimulated saliva the jade juice. Now, we all know how prized jade is in China. They said that stimulated saliva nourishes qi and puts a man beyond reach of calamities. Puts a man beyond the reach of calamities. That's a huge thing to say. And we'll talk about later, like, what that might mean. If we're applying the jade juice to chewing, which is what it's for, to the digestion of food, how could it actually put us beyond the reach of calamities? We'll talk about it in a second. Your stimulated saliva contains the digestive enzymes amylase, maltase, and lipase. Amylase and maltase break down carbohydrates, and lipase breaks down fats. So that brings us to digestive enzymes. Digestive enzymes, who cares? Well, I do. Let me tell you about them. Digestive enzymes are so powerful. Have you ever stuck your spoon, you've double dipped into your own custard or pudding or jello or something, and then you put it in the fridge for the night, and in the morning there's a little pool of liquid in the divot that you created with your spoon? That's because your digestive enzymes have been working all night on the custard, continuing to digest it in the fridge. That's how strong your digestive enzymes are. That's why you shouldn't double dip in anything that you're eating with anybody else or anything that you want to preserve. It's not just because it's rude or, to some people, disgusting. It's because the digestive enzymes are so powerful that even the residue on your spoon is going to continue to digest the food. So to introduce it back into the food is to start breaking down that plate or bowl of whatever you are eating. Detergents were originally made up of digestive enzymes. They took the pancreases of pigs and other animals, and they would apply the digestive enzymes because they break down dirt and fat and protein in our clothes. In fact, detergents are still made of the digestive enzymes of bacteria. That's how we clean stuff. Art restoration was originally spit. Art restorers would use their own saliva to break down the dirt and oil on paintings. In fact, I have a friend who is an art restorer. She's an acquaintance. And I said to her, "Hey, Nicole, I heard that art restorers used to use spit to break down dirt and oil on paintings." And she said, "Yeah, we still do." So saliva, I'm not saying every single painting that's ever been restored has always been saliva, but it's a thing that art restorers still use, because guess what? It's that powerful. Who knew? Okay, so back to your stimulated saliva. Your stimulated saliva also alkalizes food. In the last 10, 15, 20 years, we've become obsessed with alkaline foods, with water that you can buy in a store that has a pH of like 9.8. Your blood needs to maintain the pH of 7.4 in order for you to stay alive. And in fact, in order to maintain a pH of 7.4, when you take in an acid food, your blood instantly applies minerals to those foods in order to buffer their acidity. When the blood runs out of enough minerals to keep buffering the acidity of the food, your bones give up minerals in order to continue to buffer the food. So every time you take in acid foods, you are potentially putting your bones slightly at risk, because your bones are your bank account of minerals from which minerals are drawn. However, if you chew your food 50 to 100 times, it alkalizes the food in your mouth, and no minerals are required from your blood or your bones in order to alkalize the food. The reason we want things alkaline is not just because your blood needs to maintain a pH of 7.4, but because acid foods produce inflammation. And inflammation is the newest buzzword in the food and health world, but it is very important because inflammation, a chronic state of immune system response, a chronic state of inflammation, is a very dangerous thing and underlies almost every chronic illness there is. So the fact that by chewing your food, you can alkalize anything you put in your mouth. You can alkalize the most acidic food if you chew it long enough and apply enough digestive enzymes. You've neutralized it in your mouth. Your body then doesn't have to neutralize it. All right, that's stimulated saliva. It's fantastic. We'll get into the practicalities of applying it in a moment. But first, I want to talk to you about unstimulated saliva. It's equally as interesting. It's the sticky, viscous protective film that's coating your teeth all the time. It's fixing your teeth. Now, my one tooth doing reabsorption notwithstanding. By the way, my orthodontist warned me that this tooth would do this 17 years ago. It took 17 years for this to happen. He said it would take a couple of years, but it took 17. Your unstimulated saliva contains calcium and phosphorus, and it is continually putting calcium and phosphorus back into your teeth. Now we think of, oh, your teeth, they are what they are. You can't fix them. They're sort of this bank account that keeps getting depleted. Well, yeah, if you're constantly eating acidic foods, your bones and your teeth are constantly getting depleted, and chances are your saliva can do very little about reversing that process. But if you're eating good food and you're chewing your food really well, your saliva is doing the job it's meant to do. And no, the health of our teeth is not completely dependent upon toothpaste and brushing and dentists. In fact, I went to Senegal in 2014 and I found it so interesting that not only were the Senegalese to a person thin and beautiful, and ate very simple food like fish, rice, and vegetables. It was basically on the Senegalese menu every single day. They were thin and beautiful, and they all had the most amazing teeth, very white, very healthy teeth. And when you got into a cab or dealt with a shopkeeper who was just sitting around, in between transactions, they used this little stick that they were continually sort of manipulating between their teeth, picking stuff out. And the stick was from some tree. I can't remember. I should look it up. But it wasn't just a stick. It was a special sort of dental stick that they used. But it was natural. And because our teeth are meant to take care of themselves. Weston Price did all sorts of studies of teeth of like indigenous people and how healthy they were compared to the crappy teeth of the modern people. But part of it's not just the modern food that has done its damage to us. It's the modern thinking that's done this damage, making us think that we don't have protective mechanisms within our own body to take care of our own bodies. And unstimulated saliva being one of them. You can see how powerful unstimulated saliva is when you see the mouth of, say, someone who does crystal meth or methamphetamine, someone who's had salivary gland cancer or had their salivary glands irradiated. In all of those situations, those people's salivary glands no longer secrete unstimulated saliva. And when that occurs, the teeth go to hell in weeks. That's why crystal meth addicts have lousy teeth, is because they're not producing stimulated saliva. That's what the drug does. It dries up the mouth so badly that you have very little unstimulated saliva, and your teeth are, messed up. You have holes in them. They lose their teeth. That's how powerful unstimulated saliva is. Unstimulated saliva clumps bacteria. No, unclumps, anti-clumping. What I mean is, unstimulated saliva is better than mouthwash in terms of going in and stopping bacteria from clumping in your mouth and around your teeth. It's antibacterial and anti-clumping. So it kind of beats the crap out of mouthwash. Mouthwash is targeted at about 50% of the bacteria that your mouth produces, but unstimulated saliva knows your mouth and is actually working on a much broader range of bacteria in your mouth. Then what happens, it swoops it up, the unstimulated saliva is constantly cleaning your mouth of bacteria, and then you swallow it, and it gets destroyed by the hydrochloric acid in your stomach. Who knew? It also contains histidines or histatins, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, which are healing properties that actually, in rodents, the histidines actually can repair nerve endings. But in us, they just help to like seal the skin. That's part of why we say lick our wounds, or mommy like kisses your boo-boo, is actually that saliva has healing properties. Did any of you know any of this? I bet you didn't. That's why you're here. I didn't either. So we all want to chew better for all of these reasons. When I recommend that people start to chew, I say start small. Life is long. You have the rest of your life. What I'm looking for people to get is not a perfect chewing practice. Although I have encouraged people to, I've done on Facebook chewathons where everyone who joined the chewathon, I haven't done this in years, by the way, but you can do it yourself, chews every mouthful 50 times of every meal for a week. You just set this aside like a project. And it's insanely powerful to see how your body functions on food that is broken down to basically liquid for a week. You think differently, you move differently, you feel differently, and you will, did I say look differently? Look different. It's very powerful. It's one of those things where it's like if we all trained for a marathon or all gave birth to babies, it's an opportunity to see what the body is capable of. And now I'm never going to run a marathon and I've never had a baby, but chewing your food with that kind of rigor actually shows you what this is for. It shows you what your body's capable of and how it's meant to perform. So I do encourage you at some point to take on that kind of challenge. But for now, start small. What I mean by this is, well, let's see what I mean by this. Start small meaning if you're now wolfing your food and you only chew 3 times a mouthful, try 10, try 15. Any increase in your amount of chewing is a benefit to you and is getting you to that 50 to 100 times. But you're not going to do 50 to 100 times at first. Chewing is counterintuitive. You have to actually slow down. It's very difficult to do if you're with other people or anyone's expecting you to talk. In order to generate that much stimulated saliva, you should probably be functioning from your parasympathetic nervous system, which means being relaxed. Being alone is ideal. And even under those circumstances, if you're out of practice, it's going to take time to make the shift into producing that much saliva. If you need to tip your head forward, it's counterintuitive to keep food in your mouth for that long. And when I say chew to 50 to 100 times, by the way, I mean while keeping all the food in your mouth. I'm not suggesting that you're chewing and swallowing some of it as it goes down, as it gets masticated. I want you to keep it all in your mouth, continue to apply the same enzymes and the beating of the crap out of the food to the same food in your mouth. And if tipping your head forward helps so that you don't just automatically swallow, please do that. Someone's unmuted. If you need, and this is really, really helpful, a salty condiment, I think they muted themselves, a salty condiment like a little bit of olive or a little bit of pickle in, say, the mouthful of rice that you are chewing. go for it. It's really helpful. It stimulates stimulated saliva. Otherwise, I like to chew vegetables sometimes because they contain so much fluid in them already. Like a green bean is great to chew. You know, zucchini or any kind of squash. I mean, vegetables are so water heavy that they chew pretty easily. But again, you have to close up the back of your throat, kind of like you're sipping wine. It's helpful to think of like, oh, anytime I've tasted wine, I actively close the back of my throat in order to let it sit on my palate. You're doing a version of that for the chewing. I also say to people, think of it this way. Chewing can be quite difficult when you're really hungry. So I recommend that people wolf the first third of their meal. If you're hungry, just chew until, just wolf your food down if that's what you normally do. The second third of the meal, enjoy. You've slowed down, you have something in your stomach, your blood sugar is rising slightly, you feel better. So just enjoy the second third of the meal, taste it. But the third third of the meal, and for me, sometimes it isn't even the whole third. Sometimes if I'm in a rush, I just chew the last 5 mouthfuls of the whole meal. The last little mound of food on the plate, I chew the crap out of that. And it will produce the breaking down of the complex carbohydrate, the converting to glucose, the glucose getting to my brain, and I walk away from that meal satisfied. Now, do I feel like it's nourishing my chi and I'm beyond the reach of calamity? Not necessarily, because the first 2/3 of the meal were sort of unconscious, but I feel satisfied. I just want to say that one of the reasons I'm so passionate about this subject is that I had an eating disorder through my teenage years and early adulthood. And one of the facets of that experience was that I would sit down and eat lunch, say, and then at the end of the lunch, I would basically spend the next 4 hours thinking about what I was going to have for dinner. And I didn't realize then that that was hypoglycemia. But what it was, regardless of the technical name, was hell. It was hell to just be thinking about food all day and thinking about my weight and thinking about how am I going to lose weight and blah, blah, blah. And I realized that I was walking around chronically unsatisfied. And dissatisfaction isn't, once you experience physical dissatisfaction all the time in the form of low blood sugar and not having chewed, it tends to project itself onto everything else. Suddenly your friendships aren't good enough. Your work isn't good enough. The world isn't good enough. Everyone's failing you, because if you biologically have your gas tank at only a quarter full all the time, that's the lens you see through. That's how you experience everything. And capitalism is based on a model of chronic dissatisfaction. We have to always be wanting things, always want the next thing, the next thing, the next thing. And hypoglycemia is the perfect biological platform from which to launch a capitalist society. It behooves the powers that be that we're constantly hypoglycemic. So, having come from this eating disorder and constantly feeling dissatisfied, when I first chewed and felt that glucose hit my brain and experienced stupid happiness, I was like, whoa, this is a game changer. I felt like I'd been let out of prison. So for anyone who wrestles with any of that, I just want to say, this is one of your solutions. And chewing, in terms of the recovery from my eating disorder, is, I would say, 50% of it. I had to get help in other ways because I was eating for some emotional reasons too. But on the biological front, this really stopped it. And that was a revelation. Satisfaction, the benefits of chewing, satisfaction. And we've discussed where we suffer from dissatisfaction in all areas of our life. So just like I said, dissatisfaction spills onto every, it becomes the lens that you look through and spills onto every angle of your life. Conversely, satisfaction, once you feel from chewing and you get the glucose in your brain, satisfaction becomes the lens you look through, and suddenly you become satisfied with everything. Can you imagine feeling satisfied with your life, with your spouse, with your job, with your country? I mean, I'm not saying that everything becomes perfect, but I can begin to feel full and feel the glass being half full instead of chronically half empty. Better digestion. People complain of digestive issues all the time, from GERD to IBS to ulcers. I mean, we're farty, we can't eat beans because they give us gas, all this stuff. And you know what? Every single one of the digestive dissatisfactions can be improved by chewing. I promise. Because if we're not using the 3 inches of personal responsibility, we're not actually digesting correctly. So how can we, of course disorders would occur. I'm not saying it's the cause of all things, but it's part of the solution of all of them. Weight loss, there's less stress on the body. I mean, when you chew more, you eat less. They did a whole study in China between chewers and non-chewers, and the chewers, I think, lost 12% more weight than the non-chewers. Like I said, it's alkalizing. That means you are basically preventing a disease state. I mean, there's all sorts of ways diseases can take foot or take hold in our bodies, but food is a very, very, very important factor in all of them. And if by alkalizing everything you put in your body, you're preventing inflammation, how amazing is that? It's like taking a big, big, big player off the table. Now understand the alkalizing is really interesting, because in the wolf 1/3, enjoy 1/3, chew 1/3 of your meal, idea that I presented to you, you're not alkalizing all your food. However, when you chew the last third of that meal, the stimulated saliva that you start creating is so alkaline that when you swallow it, you are retroactively applying it to what's in your stomach. Your stomach has hydrochloric acid. It's not there to break down carbohydrates. It breaks down protein. So anything you put in after the stuff that you wolfed, provided it hasn't made it all the way to your small intestine, you will begin to break it down with the amylase that you throw down there. But if you want to really alkalize everything that goes in your body, you should chew everything that goes in your mouth. Spiritual connection. I've never meditated better than after I've chewed a meal 100 times. I've never had a better yoga class than after I've chewed 100 times. There's so much peace of mind that we look for and that we do all these things to achieve that chewing will give you. I promise. It's not just, oh, it happened for Jessica. It makes perfect biological sense. When you beat the crap out of a complex carbohydrate, you apply amylase to it. Amylase, it breaks down, converts to glucose in your mouth. It will become sweet in your mouth. You swallow it, and it goes very quickly to your bloodstream and your brain. That you feel this thing, this elusive thing that we're yogaing ourselves towards and meditating ourselves towards and going to gurus to tell us the meaning of life towards. And the answer is here. Personal responsibility. See what it's capable of. This, to me, is part of what they mean by puts man beyond the reach of calamity. When I chew my food 50 to 100 times, all of it, my body becomes incredibly physically coordinated. I start to literally not bump into things I would have bumped into. I'm more balanced in my body. I'm more graceful in my body. I'm less prone to doing something mindless or stupid or getting into an accident. When you chew 50 to 100 times a mouthful, try it for a whole meal. You'll see what I'm talking about. And I think one of the great benefits of chewing is that, you know, our problems that we carry in the world, our problems with, our kids and our work and the world and the pandemic, they sort of are these ideas that like live in our auras. They're like energy knots that we're carrying around all the time subconsciously, like, oh, that's bugging me. And we're weighted down by all these concerns. When you chew your food incredibly well and you swallow it as liquid, this liquid that is full of glucose and highly charged with amylase, alkaline liquid, that becomes what you eat, and it goes down to your intestines in a liquid form. All of those knots that we're carrying in our minds, in our aura, in our bodies, they're gone because you have like a liquid consciousness. And that puts us on beyond the reach of calamity as well. That hooks us up with our intuition. That creates the space for us to actually relate to the vibrational world more than the heavy, dense material world. That is like a portal to a different experience of our bodies and our minds and our spirits. So what I love about chewing is it's free. You have all the equipment for it. You can start it today. You don't have to buy anything from anybody. It's yours. And it continues to deliver benefits more than any of us could have ever known. And like I said, don't beat yourself up. Start small, but try to go from 10 to 15 to 20 to 30 over time. You will find, because you are retraining your mouth and retraining your mind around this practice, that you will get better and better and better at it. And soon you will find, like a month from now, going like, oh, I chewed that 100 times. That's weird. By the way, in terms of counting, just an aside, I count on my hand and I go, I count to 10. And by the way, I chew really quickly. And then I put out a thumb. That's 10. 20. 30. So I never have to count more than 10. Also, I chew while cleaning my apartment. I chew watching TV. I chew while watching Netflix. I chew listening to the radio. I do not believe that we have to sit and pay attention. Now, this is my personal opinion, but I think it like cracks it open for a lot of people. I don't want you sitting around thinking about the barley in your mouth. That's really boring. If you need to chew while watching a movie, if that helps you space out and relax and do it, do it. It's not about paying attention. Like I said, chewing begets mindfulness. By chewing, causing the glucose to go to your brain, you will then pay better attention than you've paid to anything you lay your mind on, possibly for weeks or months or your whole life. So start small. Don't beat yourself up. It's going to take time to do this, but eventually I want you to try chewing an entire meal and then take a day out of your life once a month and say, this is my chew day, and I chew everything on this day. And then maybe one day you'll chew for a week, but allow that third to be part of your life just to get the benefits on a regular basis. And let me know how it goes. Let me know how it goes. It's 7:48. Are there any questions? Let me stop sharing my screen. Okay, hold on. Hold on. Agree. Great presentation. I can point out that chewing and increasing saliva production contributes to the reduction of symptoms of acid reflux. That's from Toby. So someone has experienced that chewing has reduced acid reflux. I really appreciate that, Toby. Thank you. Hi, Clara. You mean chewing without? You can chew without food in your mouth. You can simply chew your own saliva, which sounds weird, but you're creating stimulated saliva. You're doing the action of the teeth. It does alkalize the saliva. Look at my hair. I look like a clown. And then you swallow that saliva, and it retroactively helps to break down anything that you just wolfed. So you can do that. You can also chew water, but I just chew my own saliva. How do you count while watching a movie?
Is that a treatment for osteoporosis, to chew your saliva?
Is that a treatment for osteoporosis?
It's a good one.
Osteoporosis, I haven't done a deep dive or gone down the rabbit hole of osteoporosis. So I can't say anything's a cure for anything because I just don't have the experience to say that. But let's put it this way. Osteoporosis is in large part a function of acidity causing depletion of minerals from the bone. So anything you can do to stop that acidification is helpful. How do you count while watching a movie? I probably don't count that much while watching the movie, but I count until this thing occurs. And what happens is suddenly my body goes, I usually sigh, and my body sort of slumps, and I start to breathe from my lower abdomen. And that's a sign that you've gone from the sympathetic nervous system to the parasympathetic nervous system, like the active mode to the receptive mode. And once I'm in that mode, I don't really need to count anymore. The chewing is natural at that point. Maybe I do chew when I'm watching a movie. Yeah, I probably do. You can watch a movie and count at the same time. Talking about your mouth, would you recommend removing amalgam fillings? Again, I have not done it. I was very lucky to not have any mercury in my mouth in my adulthood, so I haven't paid attention to this. But a lot of people are getting rid of their mercury fillings. That's what you mean by amalgam, I presume. Yes. So I don't pretend to be an expert on that, but it sounds like the rule of thumb is to get rid of them when you can. I find that I eat less when I chew well, but if I want to lose weight, I need a certain amount of food. How do these two? I need to eat a certain amount of food. How do these two go together? If I want to lose weight, I need to eat a certain amount of food. You mean you need to eat more food than you thought? From Sarah? Or less? In other words, to lose weight, you have to reduce the amount of food that you eat or increase it. I'm not sure, so please specify.
To lose weight, I have to I weigh my food, and I find I'm eating more than I would have eaten otherwise.
But more vegetables, right? Not more.
Vegetables. Tons of vegetables.
Right, exactly. Well, first of all, one of the reasons vegetables feel like more food, I mean, they're not more calories, as you know, they're more food. You're eating more bulk. And what you're getting in the vegetable is more water and more fiber. And both the water and the fiber are facilitating the weight loss. But chances are, if you were to look at, the diet that helps you to gain weight, for me, that's like sweets and oil and fat and, lots of refined carbohydrate. That's what causes me to gain weight. Although just being over a certain age as a woman, you can gain weight breathing. But, and versus what causes me to lose weight, it does appear that it's more food, but it really is much less calorie dense. And chances are, if you were to even eat half of those vegetables, but abstain from the foods that cause you to gain weight, you would still lose weight. But try applying the chewing and see how you feel.
Chewing is great. The chewing is great.
But do you chew 50 to 100 times sometimes?
Counting while you're giving your class. I'm not sure.
Okay, try it. See what happens.
But I have no sugar and no flour in what I'm doing now. It's just proteins and salads.
Good. That sounds fantastic and perfect for chewing. Would you recommend eating dessert first to get more glucose? Ha 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 ha. I always recommend eating dessert first and last. All I eat is dessert. Did I not mention that? No, the thing is, thank you for asking that, only because there are certain things that are easier to chew than others. The more refined the carbohydrate, i.e. the sweeter the food, the harder it is to chew. That's going to sound counterintuitive, but obviously a refined carbohydrate doesn't need to be broken down by the molars. The glucose is available. So once it hits the mouth, the amylase just goes, oh, great. So you might find fruit hard to chew, meaning you chew it, but it just dissolves. That's because the glucose is available, or more available, easier to activate. So no, I would not eat dessert first. In fact, you want to eat the complex carbohydrates first, break them down into glucose. It's better quality. It's slower burn sugar. It's going to nourish your brain longer. If you eat dessert first, then you don't have dessert at the end, which sucks. But you're going to feel full, and you won't actually have gotten all the other stuff, the minerals and stuff that you need from the other foods. There's a reason dessert goes last.
So if there are no burning acidic questions,
Yes.
you know, we're all acidic Jews here, then I will thank Jessica and her hair and her tooth for doing
Thank
this.
you. Thank you. Can I tell my one Jewish joke?
Oh, please.
What kind of Jews wear overalls?
Oh, yeah.
The Ashkenazi.
That's the one. Jessica, you owe us a stand-up performance. I was going to get you and Maureen to perform in the evening. So next year.
It's a sit down on Zoom, but thank you. Yes, we'll do that. Thanks, everybody. It was so much fun.
It was great. Thank you.
Nice to see you all.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
I'm going to go. I'll talk to you later. Bye.
Bye.
Thank
Bye,
you from
thank
Sweden.
you.
Oh, great. From Sweden.
From
Oh,
Sweden.
fantastic. Thank you.
I
from
read your
Florida.
book. I have read
thank
your book.
you.
Yes.
Thank you very
It
much.
was very nice.
Thank you.
I'm glad to see you.
I am glad to see you too. Welcome.
Thank
I'll
you.
see everybody later.